100 episodes, baby. 100 episodes of Ryan and Jamie.
Ryan and Jamie, 100 episodes, Ryan and Jamie.
Ryan and Jamie forever.
Cue music.
100 episodes.
No, I already said cue the music.
Cue the music.
Hello and welcome back to the Comic Lero podcast. I'm Ryan, also known as Comic Stan. I love comic books. My co-host loves regular books, and I make him read comic books, and then we talk about them in depth. And with me, as always, is my aforementioned centennial co-host. It's Jamie.
100 episodes, Ryan.
Centennial is a good word.
It was great. I'm super proud of you. I'm super proud of us.
I'm proud of me as well.
We started from the bottom, and now we're here.
We're not that far from the bottom, but we're doing a good job. We're doing a good job.
100, right? 100 episodes. Never missed a weekly upload.
Yeah, that was the most likely thing I was going to get. I was going to be like, it's just all fallen to pot. We can't get an episode out this week. And the closest it ever got, I think, was I was really busy at one point and you were ill.
Yeah.
And it was just like, if we don't do it by Friday, we can't get out in time. And we just you sucked it up. You like pulled yourself together.
Do you remember we had a conversation about us recording from home?
Oh, over Zoom.
We were talking about doing a Zoom podcast because I was super poorly and super contagious.
I hate Zoom podcasts. I listen to some podcasts where occasionally they'll, for other reasons, will have to do a Zoom podcast. And as soon as you hear that grainy quality, you're just like, oh God, because you can't get the natural flow. Like we can't have the same quick back and forth rapport that we do, you know? The
naturalistic flow that our Spotify listeners clearly have come to love. And I just want to, right up top, as users, you get a Spotify wrap that says what you've been listening to, but as creators, we get one that gives us some insights about, percentage growth and who's listening and where they're listening and what else they're into, and that's really cool.
And ours was weird because ours said more Peppermint John, and I was like, we haven't even put that episode out yet. Weird,
man. The people want more Peppermint John. But one thing that we noticed is that we had some listeners in the over 55 category, particularly in Switzerland.
Well, it said we had over 55-year-olds, and our oldest is from Switzerland. So it could be one guy, could be a couple, could be women.
But if you are over 55 and you listen to the Comic Literate podcast in Switzerland, can you write us specifically a letter?
I'm the old Switzer person.
The old Switzer person?
Switzer person, yeah.
If you are that listener, please send us an email. I want to chat to you. And thank you for listening. It's a real pleasure to have you. I really value your contribution to the podcast as a listener. And I'd just love to hear from you specifically.
And also 5-star rating on Spotify, which is pretty impressive for a podcast that doesn't do call to actions.
I know, because we very specifically don't do call to actions, do we?
We just naturally, let them come naturally, We don't interfere, we don't artificially, incite them at all,
So, shall we get into it?
Yes, and what shall we be getting into?
Well, this is a really special episode today because it is our 100th.
Yeah, not only for being the 100th.
So we are going.
Also, some catcher's going to say 101. I'm not counting the Barely Lyra episode.
Yeah, no, this is the 100th proper Comic Lyra episode.
Because that was just an hour of us talking about bollocks.
I don't even remember what we talked about.
Whereas every other episode we've done is just mostly us talking about bollocks.
Yeah,
but then
absolutely.
Sometimes about the comic book we're doing that week.
So we are going back to probably both of our favourite comic book writer.
Yeah, and possibly favourite comic book. I really had to wrestle with that decision.
Yeah, I think this might be my favourite comic book, and this is one that Ryan and I are both huge fans of. We've read it in its entirety, and we love it.
Well, we haven't read it in its entirety.
We've both independently read most of it, haven't we?
Yeah, it took a couple... So I was looking at the release schedule. It took a couple years off, and I think that's where we dropped off.
Yeah, but today, instead of just talking about one volume... We are talking about the first... We have reread the first 5 volumes of this comic book.
And we didn't plan on 5.
No, we planned on 3, but we just both kept reading.
I said, I might go past 3 because I'm really enjoying it. And then my next message was, I've read 5 volumes.
Yeah, and so I was just like, right, I'll catch up. We'll get this done. I had an amazing time rereading this comic book.
Unputdownable, I would describe.
I had the first 3 volumes.
I don't think we've said the name yet, by the way.
It's Saga.
Saga.
We're talking about Saga by the great Brian K. Vaughan, drawn by Fiona Staples.
Yes, with letters and designs by Phonographics, whoever the fuck they are.
Do you know what the best bit is? listeners, Ryan, when he does these, he reads them off the screen.
Mm.
I just know that I knew those two names because I'm legitimately a huge fan of this book.
Yeah. And you know what else? In the comic books, on the credit pages, Fiona Staples' name number 1.
Yeah.
Right at the top, which I think is a huge credit.
So let's just get into this. Saga is probably Brian K. Vaughan's best known project at this point.
Well,
possibly Tank Girl.
I think right now it's Why the Last Man, only because
Really?
that's the highest profile adaptation. So there was a TV show.
Yes.
It was meant to be prestige TV. It kind of petered out, or it wasn't quite up to people's standards, so then it got cancelled after season 1.
Yeah.
But the only other adaptation I know of is Paper Girls,
Yeah.
which I haven't seen. I've literally been meaning to watch it for ages and just haven't got around to it. Looks good. I don't know if it's good or not.
Didn't he do Snot Girl as well?
I have no idea. I've never heard that associated with Brian K. Vaughan. Actually, his highest profile adaptation might be The Runaways. Of one of his few Marvel properties that he made for them. And he was like a advisor on that show. So he was involved to a certain degree. But yeah, I don't know. I guess his name, maybe Runaways or Wide Last Man, is probably like the highest profile one.
I think Saga's his best work.
I think it is, yeah. I had to generally wrestle with that and Wide Last Man. I also have a real fondness for one of his lesser known works called Ex Machina, which is about a New York mayor who is a former superhero.
Yeah.
And it's really fucking good. Like, it's really, I recommend it. It's dense. It's like really like detail-y kind of thing. You know what Brian K. Vaughan's like.
Well, yeah. So do we want to give, for anybody who hasn't read Saga, a really brief sort of introduction as to what the premise is?
I think that's a good place to start. I think for anyone listening, and if you haven't read Saga, this is our highest. Please read it.
Yeah,
recommendation ever.
If you just come here for the Rex, I don't know why you would. 5 stars. Go buy a copy right now.
And start from number 1 because it's a linear story all the way through.
Yeah, you need to read all of it. So the premise of Saga is that there is a planet and a moon who have been locked in a very long war. The planet is called Landfall, and it has humanoid creatures who have wings. The moon is called Wreath, and they have humanoid creatures with horns. Yeah. They have been at war, and the war has progressed to such an extent that the war's no longer being fought on their home planets because they would, if you destroy the moon, you're going to knock the planet out of orbit, and the same vice versa. And so there's lots of proxy wars, and the whole universe is essentially having to pick sides as to who they support in this massive war.
Yep. And you can pretty much connect to with any real world war between two countries or armies.
Well, I think it's more specifically related to the Cold War, personally, because in the 1980s, America and Russia were both propping up dictatorships and funding little proxy wars around the world to essentially gain allies and bring people around to their way of thinking. And so this, to me, is a really interesting sort of meditation on what would have happened had the Cold War started to get hot.
But also, this one is interesting because they used to be warring planets and then kind of exported the war to everywhere else.
That's what I was saying.
So, yeah, but the fact that they were warring directly at one point is a different aspect of the Cold War. Yeah. And I think that kind of that can encapsulate a lot of other wars.
And it's certainly how World War II went.
Yeah.
There was fighting in Africa. There was fighting all over the world during World War II. We hear a lot about the Western Front and Russia and a little bit about Japan because America's up its own arse.
Sorry to our American listeners.
Sorry to our American listeners, but
Britain's also up its own arse.
Oh, Britain's so far up its own arse.
And that's why we have a special relationship.
But the two primary protagonists are a character called Marco and Alana.
Yep.
Marco is a Moonie. He's from Wreath.
I don't know if Moonie might be a derogatory term.
I think Moonie is a derogatory term. And then Alana is from Landfall. They meet in a prison camp. So Marco has
prisoner of war.
No, he has
translation ring.
No, when you give yourself up to the other side in a war,
like surrendered.
He surrendered himself. Marco has decided to take up the mantle of pacifism and has surrendered. And the person overseeing him is Alana, and they fall in love over a book. And the comic book opens to her in the back of a mechanic shop giving birth to their child.
I should also say any of the information that James just given, that is all like volume 1 stuff.
This
so
is
first
the first
5
3
issues,
pages.
and there are like the book comes in a bit later, like
Yeah.
that, but it all gets kind of the information gets doled out bit by bit, which makes it so interesting.
But essentially, Alana and Marco are both being chased. They're being chased by the respective governments of both of their countries, because if the world finds out that these 2 people from Wreath and Landfall have met, fallen in love, and had a baby, it would compromise this huge intergalactic war that these 2 countries are propping up all over the universe.
Yeah.
And that is where we drop into this story.
And the most important thing as well, to just recommend this, if you're still listening for that, is all this information is shown, not told.
Yes.
It does not give away anything. Like, there is a narration that is purely vibe, like setting, like thematic kind of stuff. Information all comes out naturally through characters.
And so we are presented with a narration, you are right, and it's their daughter Hazel's narration, but it's her far in the future when she has grown up, and she makes it very clear that she is not the chosen one who ends this war, and that she isn't special, but she did get to survive because her parents loved her, and her parents fought really hard for her. And so the whole way through, you know, whenever you see Hazel in peril, that Hazel is not going to die because we have her narration from the future. And again, this isn't finished yet, is it?
No, it's still ongoing.
This is still ongoing.
Which is why when you said, we've read all of it, I was like, no, I don't think we haven't even read half. Like, really.
But the narration itself is witty and charming.
I mean, all the dialogue is like...
the dialogue is all fantastic, and there's so little expositional content here. We meet people. Hazel will sometimes give us nods as to who certain people are, but she deals in vaguities.
Yeah, which is great for a little bit of intrigue, but not giving anything away.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's certain points where she'll say things like, oh, I didn't go back to the planet I was born on until much later, but it was me and my granny who went. And you're like, oh my God. And then you get to the bit where it's just her and her granny, and you're like, oh, it's so cool.
Yeah.
And so it really does give you a feeling that Brian K. Vaughan had a lot of this story planned out before he wrote it.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because I happen to have a little in with some little secret inside information on a website called Wikipedia. But apparently, so a couple of interesting things. The first is that he apparently conceived of the original story when he was a child after seeing Star Wars, which is completely understandable.
Makes
it's a
total
very
sense.
Star Warsy, like space opera-esque type of story. But he didn't actually properly start writing it until his wife became pregnant with his second child.
Right.
So it's actually, we had the misconception that it was his first child, because reading this is all about new parenthood and stuff. But I guess it kind of makes a bit more sense that when he was actually having the first child, he wasn't thinking about, this would make a good comic book. He was in it. By the second one, he was like, they had a bit more space of mind to think about these things in relation to a story and stuff.
And people often say this about being a parent, is that, you know, you don't really learn how to be a parent until you've got 2.
Yeah.
And
the second one is when you learn how much you fucked up with the first one.
Exactly, yeah. And also, parenting 2 children is really fucking hard, I imagine. And so it's sort of why The Last Man was very much him ruminating on how to be a good partner and how to be a good husband and how to be a man in an ever-changing world. And then this was his rumination on parenthood. And parenthood is it's a theme running through the whole text. And so all of the protagonists are struggling with parenthood in some way. And so there is a character. So there's a planet where everybody is a robot with a TV for a head.
Yep.
And one of the characters we meet is the prince of that planet, and he becomes a parent through the story. And you sort of see him battling with balancing his mental health with being a parent. I think he's Prince Robot the Fourth.
Yes.
And so you see Robot 4's sort of battles with mental health and being a single parent as well. And then there's bounty hunters that are initially sent to track down Marco, Alana, and Hazel. And one of them, the Will, ends up adopting a child.
Great character. Might be my favourite.
He ends up adopting a child, essentially. And so you sort of see his transition from being a person who only has to think about himself and his work to becoming somebody who has to be a parent. And then we also meet Marco's parents. And actually, we see the struggles of somebody who is parenting their adult child and being a grandparent. And so there's so many different perspectives on parenthood in this text.
It's very layered.
The theme of parenthood, I think, particularly in the first 2 volumes, it runs through the whole thing, and I think it gives you perspectives on parenthood that you wouldn't normally see. I think often when we think of parenthood, we think of nuclear families and 2-parent families. We don't necessarily think of blended families and male single parents and adoptive parents.
I think that's somewhat changed in the kind of past 10-ish years or so, give or take.
I would agree, yeah.
Prime examples I can think of is one of the highest rated horror films of the past kind of couple decades is The Babadook, and that's about a single mother and the kind of pressures of that. Modern Family, one of the biggest sitcoms of the past 10 years, that is about the literally blended families and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I think it's something, and this also started coming out in 2012.
Yeah.
So when this was coming out was at the precipice of all those other things.
Yeah.
So at the time, I think it was very progressive, as well as the things that came out around the same time. And I'll tell you what as well, in terms of the awards it's won while it's been out,
it's scooped up a bunch of Eisners, hasn't it?
3 Eisner Awards in 2013, won a Hugo Award, that's specifically for sci-fi, and nominated for 7 Harvey Awards. I have no idea what the Harvey Award is, but it sounds prestigious. So it's an award for comic books, apparently. But yeah, so it's not a underrated comic by any stretch.
No, we're not the only people banging on about this one and singing its praises, are we?
And it's one of the ones that I would put forward to people to be like, hey, what do you know about comic books? It's it's just like Batman, Superman, and Spider-Man stuff. And it's like, oh no, there's this stuff as well.
Well, I don't know if you found Y the Last Man or I did.
I think I definitely heard about it before I read it. So that's the only reason that makes me think I suggested it.
But I remember when you were first sort of getting me into comics, it was Brian K. Vaughan stuff, specifically Y the Last Man and then this, which we both gravitated towards because it wasn't superhero. And it wasn't Big Two, and it was interesting and textured. And so, yeah, this is definitely one for the non-comic book readers. I mean, comic book readers, traditional comic book readers will love it as well. But if you are looking for something with a lot of content as well to just plow through.
Yep. But also really quick to get through. It wasn't a slog.
No, it's page turny.
Yeah.
It's page turny. One of the things that I really love about it is the way the timeline progresses. And so you kind of drop off at the end of the volume, and then they have a really great way of just sort of indicating that time has passed because character models changed. Most notably, Hazel gets bigger.
Yeah, the easiest way to tell a couple of years have passed in between volumes.
Yeah, and so you see sort of Hazel grow, and you see their lives change as they continue their lives on the run. And you really feel like you're moving through the story. It never feels static. It's ever moving and it's ever changing. And that family dynamic changes up volume by volume, which keeps it really fresh. And I think he does a really great job of not only bringing in new characters, but also changing the existing characters that you've come used to in ways that make them feel really fresh and exciting. I mean, the way the Will's character changes through it is stunning.
I think what's interesting thinking about, I hadn't thought about this till you kind of mentioned us first reading this. I think the biggest appeal of initially it was Y the Last Man because we read that first, but it extends to this as well. For anyone who reads superhero comics and is maybe interested in non-superhero comics, the biggest appeal of this initially is this kind of comic is that there are no safeguards or plot armor for most of the characters. Obviously, we know Hazel being narrated in the future, she's going to be, she's going to live. But compared to comic books, where even before I properly read comic books or got into them, I already knew death of Superman, the Batman died a couple times, and they're back because I'm reading them now. So I already knew that there wasn't as much weight or heft to risk or anything like that. Reading Y the Last Man, and then this is any character could die.
Yeah,
they try and kind of get that across very early on. Admittedly, with not as much at the point we're reading, I don't want to give anything away, but some characters die. You could argue importance to the story and whatnot.
Well, but they at the point that the so there's two big characters that die in volume 1.
I would say, should we keep those just for the spoilers of if someone still hasn't read volume 1 yet? Okay,
yeah, that's fine. We can try and be non-spoilery, but I feel like it's a 14-year-old comic that's ongoing.
Yeah,
so.
But I want people to read that, and to support kind of what you're saying. The deaths you're talking about, really surprised me. And
Yeah.
I read this already.
Yeah.
I turned the page. I went, oh shit! Like,
Yeah.
and that's on a second, maybe third reading. Like, I can't remember if I've read
This
it.
is my third go through.
Well, there you go. But yeah, those reveals, and that's something about this whole comic is for one thing, the use of splash pages.
Oh.
So good. It uses them a lot, but it never feels overdone. Every splash page is either a huge plot point or a great big piece of art.
Yeah.
So either or, you go and like rewarded for like turning the page onto a whole page of something.
Yeah.
It does it a lot, and again, it never feels overdone. So I think that's a huge credit to it. And those ones where I said some characters die, and I'm still going, oh my god, I forgot that this happened at this point, and I'm blown away.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it holds up to rereading, doesn't it?
You know what I'm noticing now on this reread is try and take a bit more of an objective look rather than being as sucked into the story, even though I was sucked into the story anyway. But one thing I noticed was the plot devices in this are incredible. And by plot devices, I mean, so Brian K. Vaughan, he's built this world, right? And another interesting thing as well, he apparently made this entire world and the story explicitly to only be strictly regulated to comics and not adapted to other media.
Yeah.
And I get what he means. I think
this would be a bitch.
Well,
this would be such a bitch to adapt.
I think this is an unfilmable show. Like for the text, absolutely. But in recent years, I think this would be a great animated adaptation like Invincible.
Yeah, maybe.
I think like it really takes the time, gives each volume like a 10 episode series. Yeah. I think this would be amazing as that. And I should double check. I will double check when you take another bit to talk if they're actually making it, because they may or may not be for all we know. But the plot device I was talking about is he's made this world. And
Wait a minute. So we're not doing spoilers, but you're going to start talking about plot devices.
I think so. I wouldn't say they're spoilers.
I think
would you?
Plot devices are about as spoiler as it gets, surely. Plot points.
This is what I meant by like, I was trying to articulate like if this what I mean by plot devices.
Okay.
Things that he has put into the story, which are seemingly low stakes things.
Right,
I don't consider spoilers, but they actually they are tools and devices within the story to get across information.
Okay,
right?
yeah, go for it.
So the prime example, very early on, issue 1, is Marco needs to cast a spell. So his people are kind of more magic themed, whereas the winged people are more sci-fi,
yeah.
But he needs to cast a spell for them to be able to escape. And the way he needs to power the spell is with a secret.
Yes.
And he literally says, Lana, I need you to tell me something you never told anyone else, because the power of a secret is the fuel I can make a spell out of, basically, right? And it's a low stakes secret. I'll leave that for the listener so they can enjoy if they haven't read it. But immediately reading that in issue 1, I go, oh, that's going to be a great plot device for the future,
right?
Which you see in like next volume or so.
Yeah.
But immediately on that low stakes example, so it's setting the ground for the low stakes, because you don't think as much of it.
Was her low stakes secret that she likes to taste her own breast milk?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's like a funny bit, but it's not like groundbreaking at all or anything. Yeah. But now on this reread, I'm going, oh, this is going to be really important later.
Yeah.
And then it is. Another example of this is...
It's the unbinding spell, isn't it?
I don't remember what it's called, but he does it for different stuff. It's like the secret is like just raw fuel, and then he can turn it into a spell.
No, different spells need different things, and that spell needs a secret.
All right. Well, there you go then. And then, yes, because, I'm thinking about the second use of it. So, that makes sense. But another prime example, and again, not a spoiler to say what it is the character Lion Cat.
Oh, Lion Cat's so cool. We haven't talked about... So there's this order of... They're not necessarily assassins.
They're called freelancers.
Yeah.
So they're like mercenaries.
Yeah, they're mercs that you can hire. But a lot of the ones we meet have a pet with them, like a sidekick. The Will, the primary one that we meet, has a cat called Lion Cat, and it's a giant cat. And if somebody lies in front of it, it just says lying. But it can
it's
tell.
The only thing it says.
Yeah, it's the only thing it says, and it can tell when you're lying. And that is constantly used as a plot device, where people will essentially use Lion Cat to demonstrate that they're being honest. And it means that, in essence, when you're around the Will, you cannot lie to him.
And so what's so good about that is that itself becomes a future, like, again, you see it initially, very low stakes. Will's talking to someone, they say something, Lion Cat says lying, he just goes, see, lying. Like, it's very, it's not groundbreaking or anything. But then later on, and it uses a lot of low stakes situations, but then as it goes on, the higher stakes ones suddenly reveal themselves. You go, and that's, again, me reading, I'm going, oh, this was another plot device for, again, a mechanic that he's put into the world, which bears fruit later on in this amazing, very, very show don't tell ways. Yeah. But he's sowing the seeds early on. And it's just why Brian K. Vaughan's just an amazing writer for this.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the third one I thought of is, again, seemingly low stakes, is, we call him Robot the Fourth.
Robot 4, Robot the Fourth.
Yeah, his screen on his face.
Yes.
So his head is a computer screen, essentially. Television?
TV.
Yeah. And occasionally when he's doing stuff, images will pop up on the screen and they're little like subconscious, like what he's thinking kind of images. And again, starts at very low stakes. Like he's thinking about his PTSD from his time in war.
Yeah.
And then like some, of that image shows up on his face. You go, well, okay, yeah, obviously that's what he's thinking. But then later on, he's doing stuff, and then important stuff happens, and then an image comes up on his face, and you go, oh, he's actually thinking about something else.
What's really telling with Robot the Fourth, and I think is really interesting to his arc and important to his arc, is that he has mental health problems, most notably sex addiction.
Oh, yeah.
He has some really prominent sex addiction issues, which often means that he'll be talking about something, and then you'll just see some vile pornography flash across his face.
And this is what I mean. And what's really interesting about Robot the Fourth is I kind of realize now in this rereading that he's kind of like an insert conservative character. Like he's very kind of right-leaning morals and sensibilities, that kind of thing. But he also has his contradictions, which, like him and every other character in this comic, makes him multi-dimensional, fascinating kind of character.
They're multigenous and they're flawed. I think what's interesting is that his flaw is one that actually isn't unique among conservatives, which is that they're filthy-minded fucks behind closed doors.
Yeah, and he's not that kind of defensive about that kind of stuff.
No, he's quite open about the fact that there's a brothel planet called Sextillion, and he spends quite a lot of time there.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, again, they present him, but you could have so imagined, like, this is a very progressive comic, so you could imagine the kind of conservative character. And it's like easy, like he's a part of a royal family, so if any character is going to be the conservative one. But it's so tempting, I think, that the writer Brian could have just been like, and he's the butt of a joke, or he's the bad guy or whatever. Yeah. But he's not. He's sometimes, but he's not always. Like, again, there's parts where you're rooting for him.
He's honourable.
And there's parts where you're not. Like, there's a bit where, a bit later, another character dies, and it's one that he didn't like. And when he learns of their death, he's one that's been like, he's been like banging on about how shit they are, basically. Yeah. And then when he finds out they died, he goes, you know what? I was always having to go, but, goddamn, if I don't respect them now, kind of thing. Like,
totally.
And is that interesting dichotomy. And again, like it's so easy to imagine that character just being like the bad guy or whatever, but he's actually really interesting.
And again, our protagonists are flawed in really human ways.
Yes.
And so there's a passage where Marco and Alana are trying domestic life, and they're hauled up on a planet, and Alana's working for the Open Circuit, which is like pirate TV.
See, I thought there was like a bunch of different things because it's so popular on the surface.
Yeah.
But it also seemed a bit pro wrestling to me as well.
Well, because they're all in masks.
Yeah, and superhero.
Yeah.
Like it's a kind of amalgamation of like, I think what Brian K. Vaughan thinks is like, because it makes this philosophical argument about is low stakes or like trash in quotes TV the importance of it.
Yeah.
Because on the surface, it's like, oh, it's just soapy drama that people just watch and it has no message or meaning or whatever, who cares? But then another character makes the argument of like, oh yeah, well, this high art stuff that had this deep meaning, like anti-war stuff as an example.
Yeah.
When you read it, did you protest the war? Like, did you dedicate your life to like be anti-war? But it's like, no, not really. It's like, yeah, because it didn't do anything.
And I think it's interesting that it kind of makes an argument about something that didn't really exist at the time, which is the mass internet. 2012, YouTube was around, social media existed, but people weren't en masse using it on their phones yet.
Yeah.
2012, the iPhone had been out for 3 or 4 years. Smartphones existed, but they were a expensive item, and not everybody had them. But I think the whole open circuit thing makes a really concise argument about the relationship that people from our generation sort of first generation to grow up with the internet now have about the content that's being created for and by people who had the internet as babies.
See,
brain rot is an expression that's bandied around a lot these days.
yeah, it's word of the year.
Word of the year, yeah. Brain rot's the word of the year this year, and so there's a conversation going around at the moment about online content and where it's at. And I think, you know, there was a, you know, sort of early days of YouTube, there was a focus on sub 4 minute content, but information density. And then, you know, the age of long form YouTube content came about, and YouTube became a place to obsess over hobbies and learn things. And now you've got 12, 10-second videos that you scroll through, and actually it's kind of saying interesting things about something that didn't even exist when it was written to me.
See, I went a different route with that. I equated it more to the trash TV of the time.
Yeah.
Being like your reality TV, your Jerry Springer type shows.
And this is exactly what he was writing about, but I just think that to a modern audience, it now could mean something else.
I think the fact that it's such a good metaphor because it can be applied to different things.
Yeah.
Like, and again, because of the amalgamation of all the things this fictional thing does and is, it's not, you can't just plug on, like, if it was just a reality TV show or a soap opera, it would just be representative of that thing. Because he's amalgamated all these things, it's like, it's boiled down to the pure essence of watching low stakes entertainment.
Yeah.
And that can be applied to everything. And that's what's so clever about this whole universe and the metaphors that it uses and the messaging, is that because it's such a broad fictional universe, you can apply meanings of like, oh, it's like this thing in my life, but everyone has that for different things.
And I think it's really interesting that it's coming from a medium that to a lot of people is seen as being that low stakes, low quality medium.
Oh, yeah.
And the fact that they're all in sort of Mucho Libre outfits, and I don't know if that's the right name.
It's kind of superheroes, it's wrestling.
It's somewhere between traditional Mexican wrestling and superhero, isn't it?
Yeah.
But the point I was making is that I was talking about the flaws that Marco and Alana have. They're really unattractive flaws. Marco has a predilection for extreme violence.
Well, I mean, he's trying to be a pacifist, but I think that is really interesting that he's introduced at the pacifist stage, like, and he's talking about he's very anti-war. We know he surrendered himself to the other side. You imagine that character's being like, I saw war, I didn't like it, so now I just won't do it anymore. It's like, oh no. He was a fucking berserker on the battlefield. And
this is the thing. There's a moment where one of the characters is talking about Marco and Robot 4. And he says, well, you have never scared me to Robot 4. And then he looks at Marco, who is having an overdose on the floor at this point, and says, that guy fucking terrifies me. And Marco has a revelation during that, he has an epiphany during that drug overdose that actually there is a place for violence in his world again. But we see flashbacks of him going ham on people during the war. Like, Marco was a good fucking soldier.
And you see it in issue 1, I think.
Yeah.
He just takes out like an entire group of those winged people.
He takes out an entire group of soldiers.
Cuts off a guy's hand. I think we're going to go full spoilers from this point on. So if you still haven't read it, read it now, but we're getting into all spoilers now.
And then Alana's flaws. Alana's sort of, I think right at the start, there's a character who's like an intelligence agent from the Wings. The Wings being the Landfallians, Alana's race. And he says, oh yeah, she struck me as, stupid, impulsive, kind of a slut, is the exact verbiage he uses. Alana gets into drugs and it kind of breaks her family up. So when she's working on the open circuit and she's around those artists, she gets into drugs in a big way. And I think Fade Away so the drug that they're using is Fade Away, and it's kind of funny that it's bars of chocolate, but it's coded to be heroin.
Yeah,
it's coded to be somewhere between heroin and acid.
See, I thought of it as a little bit like cocaine as well, and it didn't have as much of a nut, but it's like something they take to get through the acting and stuff. So I think it looked as not quite as much of a depressant like heroin, like something that just makes you feel better during the time. But it's open for interpretation, like I said before.
But again, Alana gets into drugs in a big way for a bit.
Yeah,
and actually, that's not an attractive quality in a character that is being presented as a great mother.
But then it's kind of qualified later on where another character says, because I think the reader is meant to have that opinion, like you say. But then later, another character qualifies it by saying, like, I think she was just looking for a bit of peace, which she hasn't had for the past few years.
Yeah, totally.
Having a child while being on the run and fugitives from races of people. Like,
and this is it, isn't it? Their flaws are really unattractive, but the characters are built in such a way that even though we're presented with a bunch of deeply flawed characters, and every character is deeply flawed, they're all rich and interesting, and you root for them in different moments, and in different moments you look at their actions and go, oh, I wouldn't have done that, big guy. And it keeps you reading. They're so compelling for that reason.
I think what's especially interesting, kind of thinking about the larger sense of it, is unlike other comics and other just stories in general, TV, film, everything, there is a vague set of goal of like what the characters are trying to do. Because that's normally the thing, is like the story arc is like, what's the goal? How are they trying to get there? We're seeing the journey along that way. We have a vague kind of goal of like, they're trying to raise their child.
Yeah.
But there's no real end game. Like, there's a bit by bit, like, all right, we'll go here, we'll try this for a bit. Oh, that's not worked. I guess we'll try this now. And oh, no, we have to do this.
And isn't that just parenthood and life?
Exactly, yeah. But again, what's interesting is for other stuff, and again, closest comparison, Why the Last Man, it's finding out what happened to the men of the world and seeing if they can cure it. This is just like, it's so addictive to keep seeing what happens because it's very doom and gloom when you think about their long-term prospects.
Yeah.
And I think that adds way more stakes to everything that happens.
And it's why they don't talk about their long-term prospects. They're always in the here and now. And I think, there's obvious comparisons to be drawn to Why the Last Man. Particularly on this second reading, because relatively speaking, we were quite young when we started reading this. But we were both in our early 20s. And we are both in our 30s now. It's been about a decade since we first read this, I think.
About so, yeah.
Yeah, 2014, 2015, that kind of time. Brian K. Vaughan matured a lot as a writer between Why and Saga.
Yeah, 100%.
Massively. I think Why the Last Man is fantastic, but his characters in Why are painted in slightly broader strokes.
Yeah, and there's definitely a bit more of like a intended edginess to Why.
Yes.
Where this has the same kind of level, if not more so, of violence and drugs and horrible things, but it shows it in a much more, it's not trying to shock the reader. Like the biggest shocks are the plot developments. And occasionally that is tied with acts of violence, but there is violence just happening, which is just, it's more like the banality of war.
Yes.
When people just like are getting blown up and injured, and it's kind of like it's happening all the time, it's not that
but
big
also
of a deal.
on Landfall, and on land we see images from Landfall and people are partying.
Oh yeah, and Wreath as well.
And things are business as usual. Well, Wreath is set up as almost being like a medieval society, isn't it?
Well, they're more magic and stuff.
Yeah, but Wreath almost has a feel of like feudal Japan to me.
Yeah.
And we don't see much of Wreath yet.
Well, what's interesting especially is Wreath and Landfall. Wreath is the moon to Landfall.
Yes.
So Landfall is way bigger than Wreath, but they seem to be at odds with this war. It kind of made me think, again, like there's so many aspects of different real world parallels. And for that, it made me think of like Japan and China.
Yeah, totally.
I remember at one point just thinking like, I'm not a history guy at all. Like I don't barely know anything about history. I remember just at one point, just having the random thought of like, how the fuck did Japan give China like such an issue? Like when you think about their size and landmass and armies and stuff, and it's because of the strategic nature of like the land and the fact that, if I'm right in thinking, I did a very loose look for the answer here, but it's generally like China had more targets, so they were spread out more across more, whereas Japan had to defend one place, but they could attack a lot of places on China.
Yeah, and Japan had well-organized armies at the time, and Japan had a military code kind of baked into it. Because the Japanese invasion of Japan is quite interesting, and it is impressive.
Yeah.
So going back to what we were talking about,
it's going to be a lot of that.
Very rare that it's me doing this. It's sort of the level of maturity in Saga. It's because there's an obvious liberal agenda in Why the Last Man.
Oh yeah.
And to be honest with you, Brian K. Vaughan doesn't strike me as being that liberal, but of course that's through my lens of being a very liberal person. But the liberalism in Saga, it's almost as though he'd matured into it, and he had really matured into his beliefs. And so he wasn't self-consciously presenting his beliefs, but he was writing from that perspective. Whereas Why the Last Man feels as though he was very self-consciously presenting his belief system to us. Whereas here in Saga, he's presenting different characters that emulate different aspects of what he believes in, And so we're seeing kind of his belief system spread out over an entire story. And it feels, even though the story sprawls and it's ever moving, you're never in one location for more than a couple of issues. But the story feels incredibly cohesive for something that has that much movement in it.
Oh yeah, there's a aspect of, so in terms of like people who write, like I'm always been interested in like writing as a thing I've never actually done. But you know, when you think about like, what would it be like if I wrote something? Like, what would that be like? So I look at some stuff like that. And one of the best bits of advice that I ever got and have never used is from the South Park creators.
Right.
Because all of their stories, or at least most, like almost most, is that all their stories are written in we start with like the norm, like the world as we know it in South Park, and then B happens. So B can be anything, right? B can be whatever we want it to be. C has to be a direct result of B.
Yeah.
And every point afterwards has to be that.
Yeah.
So they never, and that's kind of why they shout on Family Guy a lot, because Family Guy was like, this is just as bad as the time I did, you know.
Family Guy was more frenetic, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
And they could do any joke they wanted because they created this setup for them to do that. But South Park has always been, every joke is related to the story as it's happening because it has to, because they can't do anything else, and everything follows on after that. And that is what I think is this. Like, there is most plot points. I say most plot points follow on A to B to C to D, right?
I'm yet to find a plot hole.
I've not plot holes. I've got contrivances. I found 2 contrivances that I went, but it's only because the comic is so amazing that they stick out to me.
Imagine if we started grumbling about minor plot contrivances in a Batman comic.
Well, that's the thing, though. That's what I'm saying is, like, I allow this kind of stuff in Marvel and DC stuff because my expectations are lower than this. And if a superhero comic does this level, then it's amazing.
Yeah.
When Brian K. Vaughan does something like that, I go, it is amazing, but I'm not as shocked and surprised and celebrating as much. I should be, because it's one of the best comics I've ever read in my life. But yeah, it's different. You notice the flaws when everything's perfect, as opposed to something that's quite rough, and then you just kind of look like, oh, the positives are this, and this, though. But yeah, I've got a couple of contrivances. We're in full spoilers now, so I'll mention them now. We've done a spoiler warning already. So one is, I remember the second one because it's the more recent one I've read. The character so there's a character, I think his name's Dengo.
Yeah.
He's a janitor robot character who basically kidnaps Prince Robot's...
the Princeling.
The Princeling. And he happens to end up on the planet where our main characters are because he wants to try and get his message out or something.
Yeah.
So, and it's not, he could turn up in their story, like that's not a contrivance or a coincidence at all. The fact that he turns up with Prince Robot's kids, like of all the galaxy.
I got that as well, yeah.
And again, if it was any other comic, I wouldn't mind as much. And the only reason I'm noticing it here is because every other plot point is natural, feels natural and makes sense and isn't as contrived.
It made sense in context, though, because the open circuit is something that's broadcast all over the universe, and it's the only thing that is. Yeah,
but what are the odds that these runaways, these, what's the word? Bloody fugitives. Yeah. We're both blanking on words today. These fugitives were like, oh, I know, one of us should work on the most seen television broadcast in the universe.
It is a weird decision, isn't it?
Exactly. And it is one of those like, yeah, but we wear a mask and who would think to look for us here kind of thing. Yeah. But it's just what are the odds that they converged in that way? I'm glad they did because the story from then on is great and it creates alliances which you didn't see coming before and characters in new settings. So like basically it leads to Robot and Marco having to team up because Marco gets separated from Alana.
Yeah.
And also that as well, fantastic red herring with Hazel being, this is the story of how my parents split up.
Yeah.
And that you see the beginnings of their problems and you're like, oh no. And then it turns out she meant literally split, like they get physically separated and are apart from each other. So that is like
for months as well.
Oh yeah, for a long time. But you know the connotation of this is how they split up. You immediately jump on the most obvious meaning of that.
And I think, funnily enough, my favourite bit of the comic is the bit that we're not talking about much today, but it's when Hazel and the granny, I can't remember her name.
God, I forgot her name, but Horn grandmother.
Yeah, Marco's mum.
Yeah.
Are in that facility for refugees. And then Alana and Marco are like traveling the universe together. Kind of.
Oh, I'm not at that point yet.
No.
Like, that's after because the end of volume 5.
Yeah, we see her in there.
Yeah.
This is what I was saying.
Yeah.
This is what I was saying. My favourite bit of the comic book is volume 6, when Marco and Alana are sort of trauma bonded to each other and they're galvanizing their relationship, trying to get back to Hazel.
Yeah.
And that's powerful stuff.
Oh, yeah. I think volume 4 is kind of my least favourite. Purely
Gardenia?
But purely because it has to do this stuff to build the blocks for the next stuff.
Gardenia is when they make an attempt at domestication.
Yes.
So Alana's working, Marco's being a parent, Grandma's there with them, and they're essentially having a stab at a family life.
Mm.
For me, I enjoyed the constant sense of peril.
Well, there's less peril at that point, though.
But it's insidious because you know that while they're living that domestic life, they are putting roots down and they're talking to people and they're having conversations. Like, even though they didn't tell anybody who they were and what they were, Alana's colleague knew exactly who the fuck they were.
Are we talking about the green woman?
Yeah.
So she knew because she was...
she was Oswald's ex-partner. Yeah, of course. Sorry. Yeah.
Also a great character. For a brief time, his introduction being drunkenly shooting at bone animal creatures while he's pissed himself in tighty whities.
Oswald Heist is the author of the book that they fall in love over, and in the volume 2 volume 1 they go and visit him.
Volume 2, I think, because the end of volume 1 is like, where do we go? It's like, how about a little lighthouse planet?
Yeah, I love his introduction. He's pissed himself. He's got a fake gun, and his words are, "You stupid cunts here to take back my advance." And then it says, a lot of people made a bad first impression on us, particularly the people who are trying to kill us. And then Hazel's narration is, but no one makes worse first impressions than writers.
Yeah.
And I think that's Brian K. Vaughan's little nod to the people he works with.
I mean, to himself as well.
To himself, yeah. He must self-identify as a writer.
Do you want to hear my other little contrivance? It does relate to, I think, a big point we're both going to talk about. A plot point specifically. It's the Will... trying to free the slave girl from Sextillion. So the contrivance is he frees this girl, and then she turns out, because she's from the planet, she has a sense that she can hear this technology, the magic technology that Gwendolyn's using.
Yeah, she has fourth sight or whatever you call it.
And you can tell the point where the contrivance reveals itself, because he's got her, they've freed her. Everything's like, they're finally like, oh, we better pick up the trail now of Marco and Alana. And she goes, oh, I can hear that thing.
Yeah.
And they all go, what? And I read that and I went, all right. Like, all right, you had to do it, but I don't like that you did it, but you're doing so well.
But they moved the story along and they function.
Yeah. And again, everything else is great. I'm not even saying they should take it out or anything. I'm just kind of like, I'm seeing it, like, it takes me out of 1% that I go, all right, they had to do this because this happens.
Yeah.
Not even like, not the character, like the writing had to do this to make the next part happen. And I don't think they even needed it, really. Like, I think they could have done something else. Like, soon after that, the Will has a tip from one of his informants. Yeah. That could have been it. So, it just seems a bit odd that they had to put that in there, you know?
No, yeah, I get that. And I must admit, both of those things did strike me as well.
Also, self-confessed, that is very nitpicky. Like,
it's probably going to be one of our only negative.
It's my two negatives are so small that they are nitpicking.
Yes,
which again is further testament to just how great this whole comic is.
Yeah, totally.
But what I was saying, that leading on to that whole B plot essentially of the Will and this slave girl from Sextillion, like that scene is really powerful.
Oh, it's so powerful because the Will goes to this brothel planet and somebody sort of, he says he's looking for some kinky fun. And
he's got that card from the Wreath people, unlimited card. He's like, oh, who else has been employed on this? And he goes, oh, the Stork is another freelancer. He's like, well, I'm not going to get to him first, so better use this card while I've got it.
And the Stork is a spider person who's his ex-girlfriend, and later on we see them having some very weird sex.
And also, great plot point because it starts off with him being like, oh my God, not the Stalk. Like, oh, I'm staying away from them. I don't want anything to do with them. And you're immediately like, what violent thing happened that makes this tough guy scared of another freelancer? And it's like, oh, they're exes.
Yeah, he's actually just in love with her and she's not that into it.
Yeah, because it's a really good reveal. You expect there to be like, you bastard, like, you bitch. Like,
and when we see that, we don't know that the Stalk's his ex-girlfriend until after we've seen her. And then we see this terrifying spider person.
If anyone's played Dark Souls, Quelaag it's like a boss in Dark Souls. It's basically her. Woman up top, spider body.
If you were going to...
Which would you have?
If you could have, right, woman up top, spider thorax, or woman down below, so lady parts, but spider up top, which are you gonna...
I mean, both suck, but I think like we are...
You have to.
It's the same as the mermaid argument.
Well,
like,
I know, and this is what... But it's the mermaid argument, but I've made it relevant to the comic.
Yes, but you have to go with the body up top because we as creatures, we are more identified with faces.
That means you're fucking a spider hole, bro.
Both are bad. Don't tell me like I
Brian
made
wants
the wrong
to fuck
choice.
the spider hole.
So you would take spider face.
Oh no, I would definitely take spider body.
Exactly, yes. But what's interesting here was a really great design choice, and we haven't done like a bit on the art, but the art's just great all the way through. I think that's
fantastic, consistently.
Exactly. Great facial expressions all the way through.
Yeah.
You'll see it on page 1.
And what I love about it is that the character models change through time.
Yes.
In really interesting ways. And the art, we didn't talk about the art much because we were so keen to get into the story.
The art's fantastic.
Yeah, the art's excellent.
But the
Fiona Staples knocked it the fuck out of the park.
And apparently she did all the designs herself, essentially thought up all the designs and everything. With the Stalk, what's really interesting is she doesn't have human arms.
No.
So you would expect, like the mermaid thing, it's like all human up top and then all animal, whatever, beneath.
It's a
but
great
she doesn't have
blend.
any human arms because she's got 8 arms sticking out of the thorax.
Yeah.
So why would she? And they're all got the hands.
Yeah.
She's holding like a bunch of weapons when she first turns up. But it's so good where the Will, you expect this kind of like, you bastard, you bitch, kind of like, disagreement. But she calls the Will and she's like, hey, Will, I need a favor from you. And he's like, no, I don't want to. And she's like, oh, are you still upset about this thing? It's like, yeah, I told you I love you. And you
she's
turned
like,
me down.
should we team up on it?
Yeah.
Her first thing is like,
She's like, oh, everything's chill.
And it really is sort of, we meet quite a few freelancers later on.
And I love, again, little fucking world thing. They all have the as a
they're all
prefix.
the something, the Stalk, the Will.
And it doesn't tell other worse comics would have been like, the freelancers are all called the something. There would have been like a little box of text. Here, he just says, the Will. And they go, freelancer. And you can tell like, that's how people know they're freelancers.
This is important, yeah. We meet a few of them. It's highly implied that the Will, the Stalk, and the Will's sister, who is the Brand.
Yeah, the Brand.
Are pretty up there.
Oh, yeah. The best of the best.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a shame that 2 of them fucking die.
Yep, that I did not remember one of them, and I was shocked.
The Brand.
The Brand.
Yeah.
But I was shocked because I didn't remember it, and I went, oh, shit.
Her dog, Sweet Boy, is so much fun. He's a big St. Bernard.
Oh, yeah. But Lion Cat's the best, though.
Oh, Lion Cat is great. And just a really useful plot mechanic the whole way through.
Yeah. Great point.
But... yeah, great point that you made earlier.
Thank you. But so that whole subplot with the slave girl, that again, that big splash page reveal. It's not crazy art or anything. It's just the reveal of a child in a brothel.
And this is it. So a pimp leads him to her, and he's like, "Oh, I've got something really interesting." And he calls them livestock.
Yeah.
So I've got some really interesting livestock for you. And then the splash panel is a little girl looking up at you. And that broke my fucking heart.
I had to stop. I was going like page. And when I hear that, I just had to stop for a minute and be like, oh, Jesus.
And
it's a gut punch.
Well, she's a war refugee. And again, we live in a world where shit like that happens.
And that's a really dark, depressing thing, which we won't get into too much on this podcast.
No, but he went there and did it with... There's no way to write a plot point like that into your story and have it be delicate. And we talked about this, I think, with reference to Game of Thrones ages ago, like a year ago in the podcast, with the storyline with Daenerys being underage and there's an R scene involving her. And, And there's no way to delicately write this into a story. That is a gut punch.
Yeah, but you have to present it as that.
And this is the thing, is that he went there and I've talked in the past about having quite strong feelings about that kind of stuff in literature and whether or not it has a place in literature. But he went there with all of the delicacy that you can bring to that.
Yeah, there's nothing explicit about it. It's not for edgelord shock. It is purely emotional shock.
Yeah,
Like-
but then there's this beautiful scene between her and Lion Cat.
I was going to mention that as well.
So
yeah.
she sat with Lion Cat and
She's just saying stuff about herself, like favorite color, like
Yeah.
she likes dancing and
yeah,
stuff like
so
that.
she's stating facts about herself while she's trying to remember who she is. And then she says, I feel dirty and I'm dirty inside because of the things that happened to me on Sextillion. And Lion Cat just goes, lying.
Yeah, and then she
And it's-
hugs Lion Cat.
Yeah, and it's
And again, just very simple, very effective. Like
it's so fucking beautiful.
it's the kind of antidote almost to the initial presentation of the character, the reveal
Yeah.
of her. Like you get the bad, but you get the good later on as well.
And
if
we
you
also
stick with
get
it.
to see her grow up to be this really intelligent, effective person.
Yes.
But either way, I think he went there and it's in the story. It's enough to put some readers off, I would argue.
Yeah, I think so. If you stop at that point and you don't want to see what happens next, then I think you're missing out. But everyone has their different sensibilities, and you can't argue with that really.
But he does it with such grace.
Yeah, 100%.
Well, no, he does it with as much grace as you can possibly bring to that topic, I think.
Yeah, he presents it in the only way you can in a text like this.
Yeah, totally. And it's... Yes. Yeah. I mean, I don't think there's much more to say about that.
No. The only stuff I was going to mention beyond this is, again, just like kind of favorite parts, like favorite bits as they were happening.
Well, I think before we get into like little bits, there's more
To be
broad
fair,
strokes.
I didn't even actually make any notes on little bits, potentially.
No, because we knew we were talking about five whole volumes.
We planned for 3 and it turned into 5.
I mean, there's amazing characters we've not even talked about yet.
No, there's way more characters. And again, if you're listening at this point and you haven't read it and you are just listening to us talk about it, we have touched on like 10-20% of the entire story. Like there's so much that we will never have time to get. We would maybe one day in the future we would, I think, have to do a issue by episode podcast about Saga. Like I think that's something we could generally do one day.
Yeah.
And it would just be these parts, but just about every line of dialogue and every panel of every page. So yeah, there's so much still to get into. If you've heard this much and you haven't read it, you should absolutely still read it. Like there's way more to get out of it.
Oh yeah. I mean, we've not talked about what's her name? The ghost.
Oh, Isabel. Yeah.
Isabel.
I think it's Isabel.
Isabel, yeah.
Again, great plot device of like, I have to be bonded to someone who was born on this planet. And again, like I talk about all these contrivances that take me out of it. I'm reading that stuff and I'm like, it is a contrivance in a way, but it doesn't feel like it at all because, yeah, of course a ghost has to be bonded to someone to leave the planet. Yeah, all right, because she's a ghost of the planet. Like that's how it works.
She's a defender.
And if she can bond to anyone, it has to be someone who was born on the planet because that's the point, is to defend the natives of the planet.
I think she dies later as well.
I mean, she's already a ghost, so we'll see.
But no, I think she goes away, like dies. So Isabel only comes out at night and she comes out of Hazel and she's basically their babysitter.
Yeah.
Like she helps, even though she has no corporeal form, she's like a part of the family. And she's a teenager and shows there's a sense of arrested development. She's a queer teenager as well.
She's got no legs.
Yeah, she's got no legs. She's got guts hanging out of the bottom of her.
The most notable thing that you'll recognize when you see her.
But she's a queer teenager who, with arrested development, who remains as a queer teenager.
You know what that kind of made me think of was like, like within the kind of past decade, so I think it's less now, but when people were dancing around like how to be PC and politically correct and everything, and like the idea that there's someone in the room with no legs and you're desperately trying to describe them without referring to the no legs. Like, she's the teenager, the ghost teenager. She's the queer ghost teenager. She's wearing a hat. And someone's like, do you mean the one with no legs? You're like, shh, you can't just
Shut the fuck up.
You can't just say
We're not
that.
hard to notice the most obvious thing about this person.
Maybe laugh. So yeah, again, I didn't make any as many little notes.
Yeah.
But there's so many lines of dialogue which are just amazing. There's ones that, again, I think Brian K. Vaughan does indulge his edgelord shock aspect of him, which is still there, but with certain
Do you
lines.
think of him as an edgelord?
I think he's got I think it's a part of him. Like, I think Wild Last Man had a lot of scenes which were shocking to be shocking. And again, he used it to good effect in Wild Last Man. But like you say, he's refined it here where it doesn't feel over the top. But it doesn't feel shocking for the sake of shocking, like some parts of why The Last Man did.
Isn't he American of Irish descent or something?
No, Canadian.
He's Canadian.
Yeah.
Do Canadians have the same aversion to the word cunt that Americans do?
Yeah, everyone does. It's just us in Australia.
Because he throws it in every once in a while, doesn't he?
There you go, exactly. But I think way more people say it in Why Last Man than here.
I think it's only once in Why the Last Man.
Nah, they must get it.
In fairness, it's all women, of course. They're calling each other cunts all the time.
Exactly.
I think we only see it once here.
But in terms of like shocking lines, again, I'm not just talking about like swears, but there's a line later where Marco and Alana are talking about how whether or not they risk getting pregnant, and Marco says the line something like, "You literally told me to shoot it up your twat."
Yeah, squirt it in my twat or something.
And I think in American it's twat. I think that's how they say it.
But he did say twat. He said twat,
I think it's
not
written
twat.
the same way.
Oh, is it?
Yeah. The A is, Americans is the vowels are a little
Twat.
different.
Yeah.
You twat like that. But yeah, and again, that line it's shocking, but it's way more. I think it's him indulging that, but it makes the characters feel way more real.
It's a very real thing though, because she was like, "No, that was sexy, Alana."
She can't be trusted.
She can't be trusted. She uses the word. What
dick,
was it?
Unironically,
she uses the word dick unironically and is obsessed with her nipples.
Yeah, but again, so many little lines like that, which I very early on had to tell myself, don't just know all these lines because there's too many. Like there's so many good ones. You can't do anything for it. I tell you what else, little bit just made me laugh. A lot of little bits made me laugh in this. For one thing, Goose character, great little character. He's the little
Gus.
seal. No, it's Goose because
he's got an umlaut.
Yeah, but no, it does a very clever way of telling you how it's pronounced because he says the name just written. Like you're reading the comic and you just see it written, and then Robot the Fourth goes Goose, like Goose. And he goes, no. Goose, and then that's how it tells you that's how it's pronounced by someone getting it wrong, but the spelling is literally GHU umlaut S, and then Robot the Fourth just goes Goose, like just written like the animal Goose. So again, love a little bit, but he's just a lot of fun. When Robot Fourth sees it, when you first see Robot Fourth meeting his dad for the first time in the comic,
and he's huge,
a giant big screen TV. It just
fills an entire splash panel.
That's like 5-6 times his entire body, like just a ridiculous amount. The little details like the royalty of the robots being in color and all the regular folk being black and white.
And they're old CRTs.
Yeah.
So their heads, like Robot 4's head sort of looks like, you remember early Apple Macs where they were built into one and they had those really sleek, like sloping monitors?
Yeah.
His looks like one of those.
Yes.
And the rest of them look like these tiny little gnarly CRTs.
Very square, very pointed, that kind of thing. Yeah. Again, just little bits like that all over the place. There's tiny little bits like the reveal that the will gives Slave Girl the name Sophie.
Yeah.
As just she should give a name. Also, the plot with the stalk as a hallucination.
Oh.
And a great red herring because you just go, oh yeah, he's in grief, and the comic is showing us he's in grief because he's seeing this dead character who he's grieving. And I assume everyone's the same as me, where you just go, oh, that's it's a visual device of his grief, And then it's revealed, oh no, the planet's food is toxic and it creates hallucinations, and it's
so that you don't
such
leave.
A twist, And it's just so clever.
Which lends to him nearly dying.
Exactly. The reveal that the brand's name is Sophie.
Yeah.
And that's where he got the name from. A great bit, which, again, spoiler for end of volume 5. So really late in the game if you still don't want to hear this stuff. And this is barely a spoiler, but it's just a really good emotional twist. They find the stuff to revive the will from his kind of comatose state that he ends up in. But they then have to tell him that in doing that, his sister, the brand, died trying to get the stuff. And immediately he's like, why did you do this? Like, you got her killed to bring me back. Like, you could have left me and she'd be alive. Yeah. And is angry at the people who have essentially saved his life. But
also because the brand is like, she's a more grounded, more effective version of him. And I think
she's less bullshit, more more no frills, very straightforward.
Very straight, and she kills fewer people. She's less
she
murdery.
says she kills fewer people, but she's telling a child that. So and Lion Cat's not there when she says it.
Oh yeah, that's true. Lion Cat's not
she's
there.
Like, oh, I'll go get Lion Cat if you want me to verify this. So I'm like, yeah, you know, they're not going to do that. Not. I don't trust you. I like you, but I don't trust you.
Yeah, I just think that it's and you are right. There are so many tiny details that I could get into. The issue is, when we start getting into tiny details, we then need to give you a broader plot.
Yeah, for every
we then need to spend 5 minutes telling you the broader plot that leads us up to this really charming piece of dialogue or this lovely finer detail. Like, we've not touched on Gwendolyn.
No, great character.
Marco's ex-girlfriend, Wreath High Command, is one of the people that ends up trying to track them down. And again, it's sort of...
We haven't gone to the journalists.
Oh, the journalists, man. Yeah, they're amazing. The fun little thing that the brand does to them.
Yeah.
So the brand poisons them, and it essentially is a poison that means that if they ever tell the story that they're trying to tell about Alana and Marco, they'll die. And one of them is the photographer, and he's like, right, we just go do something else. And the writer's like, no, I have to tell this. This is the most important story of our careers. And he gets shot, and he turns to his boyfriend, and he's like, keep shooting. This is the stuff that gets you awards.
So it's all great stuff. And again, maybe one day in the future,
we'll do a play-by-play.
Maybe when it ends, because we've got to issue 30, which is the end of volume 5. Issue 70 just came out.
Yeah.
So we genuinely haven't done even half of what's come out, and it's still not over. And we don't know when it's going to end.
Yeah.
I hope they do something that Robert Kirkman did for The Walking Dead.
And not tell anyone.
Not tell when it ends, and just end it. Like, I think that'd be really cool. But I tell you what, we said before about, you've said the concept of like coffee table books.
Yeah.
I'd get this entire compendium and just have it out for people, just be like, oh, what's this? And just have a flick through, you know.
I mean, I own like 3 volumes of this, and I'm about to go and buy the rest.
Yeah, I might just wait for it all to come out and buy the compendiums are like just the entire, like, it literally goes up in stages of like, you get your single issues, then you get your volumes, then you get your collected hardbacks, which are like a couple of volumes put together, then you get your compendium, which is all of them. It's like, what stage is like, well, yeah, I've got volume 2, but I've got like collected hardback 8, and I need these to fill them in the middle. Like,
because I started buying it in volumes years ago, I think I just have to keep buying it in volumes.
Yeah, you're committed now. Whereas again, I'm just holding off.
I also have a copy of issue 1.
I got you that, I think.
You bought me that, yeah. I have a copy of issue 1, which you bought me. Brian, if you're listening, we've just given you a glowing review. Could I maybe send it for an autograph?
See, I was thinking this the other day, because I've seen some comic YouTubers that literally will do like Zoom interviews with comic creators and stuff. And I see that thing, and I'm like, I don't think I'd ever want to meet any comic creators. Obvious exception being Alan Moore.
Well,
like,
because that's the only reason we do this podcast.
Yeah. But if we ever got a chance, like, oh, hey, do you want to meet this comic writer or artist and review their stuff? I'm like, no, because I want to freely like praise what they did well and shit on what they did badly. Like, I
think I'm too unpredictable.
Well, that as well, yeah.
Like, you would probably be fine. I'm the rogue element here.
But also, I don't want to be in the position where I have to be like, oh, I really like this part, but I didn't like this. Like, you can't say I didn't like this part of your work. Like,
and I think the charm of an interview is that you can probe them for more detail about the process and the context. And I would be really, really interested, because he's built such a large interconnected world here with a really vast array of characters. I mean, it's Star Wars level shit, isn't it?
100%.
I would be really intrigued as to what he was reading before he wrote it, and what his source material was, how much research he did. I would be really interested in that stuff. And I think an interview, automatically, I think an interview that you and I did would be quite intimidating because there's 2 of us.
Yeah, that is a common thing, I think, with some creators doing 2-person interviews. But again, I kind of don't care as much about the process. Like, if someone else does interview with someone and they have like a Brian K. Vaughan's process for writing Saga. It's like, yeah, I'll give that a read. But I kind of don't care enough myself to ask that kind of stuff. Like I'm a very end product kind of person. Like just I want to look at it at the end and judge it and review it and say what's good and what's bad. When someone's like, oh yeah, to do this, I was thinking this kind of thing. And I'm like, yeah, I just want to read it. Like, I just want to experience it.
So let's just say Brian K. Vaughan hears this episode, loves it. Loves it.
Contacts us.
Yeah. And an opportunity to interview Brian K. Vaughan comes across our table. And I'm so excited at the prospect that I make you do it.
And then I go, do you think it was a bit contrived to have a...
Well, what is the one question you'd want to ask him? If you had to interview him, if it came across our table and I was so excited about it that I made us do it, what would you ask him?
I guess my main thing would be, what were you thinking when you wrote Ex Machina? Which is like the one, because it's his big one between Y and Saga.
How long did it run for?
Not very long, because I read it front to back, and I don't know how many issues it was off the top of my back, but I don't think it was more than like a couple of years, if that. And again, if it's like monthly releases, that's not very long, especially compared to this. But yeah, I'd just be like, oh yeah, that was a weird one. What were you thinking with that? You know,
because this must be up there at this point. I mean, take manga out of it because mangas run forever.
Yeah.
But this must be up there with The Walking Dead for one of the longer running non-superhero continuous stories.
Yeah, Invincible is superhero.
Yeah, but it's sort of, it kind of counts.
Yeah.
I get it.
And that was like over 10 years.
Yeah.
So it's definitely a way ahead of this. Saga had, I think, about 4 years off at one point, which I think was when, again, we dropped off.
Yeah.
Like, I think it was something like 2018 to 2022. I think it just didn't release anything, which fair enough. Like this is one of those stories where you have to have the big board with
all the red tape,
with the red string and all the pins and everything. So I get like, let's take a hiatus to make the quality, keep the quality up for.
What's really interesting is there's some textual evidence here that Brian K. Vaughan might actually do that, because Oswald Heist has one of those, and he's like, "Oh, I'm planning for my next novel." And it's like, I wonder if that's what Brian K. Vaughan's writing room looks like when he's writing Saga.
Yeah, 100%. Like, that'll be my question. I mean, like, how do you write this? Like, do you just write notes here and there and then put it all together later? Or do you have the big board with the cork board with the pins and the red string and everything?
So yours would be process driven?
Sure, yeah.
I think I'd be really interesting to hear how he feels about the early issues, because that's something I'm really interested about. When you commit to something this vast, how do you end up feeling about the start? Does he look back at the start and go, oh, for fuck's sake, I have a great idea that I could make use of right now on issue 70, but I wrote issue 1 14 years ago? Yeah,
I reckon any writer who does anything for long enough probably has that. They probably have it as soon as a part is released.
Well, I was just watching John Green, the Vlogbrothers.
Yep.
He's putting a book out soon, and he just got the first pass, which isn't the first pass. It's the first time he sees it as a whole finished book, and he gets to make the final alterations before they physically start printing it. And he sort of says, this is the last time I'll ever read it, because as a writer, he cannot read his own work because the story's not his anymore. When he's done writing it, he has to stop looking at it, because if not, he said, I would still be editing my first novel if somebody didn't physically take it from me. And so it's like, I wonder how it feels to then still be working on something, but have some of it be set in stone, but some of it that's still yours. Yeah,
I think what's especially interesting with compared to comics and novels, like series of novels, as opposed to television and film and stuff, is it's most times it's just still you as the creators. This being Fiona Staples and Brian K. Vaughan.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's artists have the same thing or not. Like, if it's the same. Writing is more of like a moving chess pieces on the board, whereas art, I don't know how that relates. But the writers, like, they are the only ones doing it.
Yeah.
So, as you say, they can look back on the first one and go, oh, I should have done this different because I'm now doing issue 70 and this is going to be different now. Whereas television and film, people are cycling in and out. Like rarely there's like one singular vision that lasts more than a couple of series or one or two films.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's very unique to comic books, which maybe that's a thing that, but then are you opening a can of worms with a writer to be like, what would you change in the thing? They're like, don't ask me that.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to think about that.
Yeah. Don't make me talk about the ways that I think my work falls short.
Yeah, exactly. And this is why I don't want to speak to any creators or anything at all. I just want to review their work and again praise it when it's good and shit on it when it's bad.
Yeah.
And I want to do that in kind of complete objectivity. Now, that's not to say if we get any kind of offers like, hey, with this comic book is coming out, like, do you want to mention on your podcast, whatever? I'll be like, hey, this comic book's coming out and it looks really cool. And then after that, I'll then review it and I'll be like, so you remember that thing I was showing you? Turns out it's a piece of shit. But we got the money for it to say, I'm never going to say something's good when it's bad. But if something's coming out, I'll say, hey, this thing's coming out and it looks like it could be really good.
Any potential advertisers that are listening, be aware, the only recommendation Ryan will give something is that it exists.
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, potentially, if I love something, I could then go to someone and be like, hey, I love this thing. Like, if like, this is a really dumb example, but if someone was like, hey, do you want to advertise Saga? Like the next issues that are coming out ever, I'm more than happy to not mention my nitpicking contrivance things to just be like, it's all amazing. Everything's great about it. Here's what's, like what we've just done for the past hour, basically.
I mean, I think the nitpicks are a nice indication of just how genuinely good we think this is, because you have been...
It's finding a chip on a diamond.
Yeah.
Like, it's that. It's not like, oh, this one thing just ruined everything for me. Like, it's such high praise to be like, my only complaints are pedantic nitpicking. Yeah.
Pedantic sort of plot contrivances.
Yeah, exactly. I was just like, that wasn't as good as it could have been. Like, that's me,
And again, I think, this is really plot heavy, but it also has something to say. And I don't often get that with a thing. When I'm watching action, I'm there for the plot. And if I'm watching sort of arty cinema or reading classic literature, I'm there to sort of see what it's saying about the world. Whereas here, you are swept away in a really great plot, in a beautiful, fantastical universe where literally pretty much anything can happen. And yet it's speaking to me. And that's just really interesting that it serves both masters.
Yeah, and it has that kind of but a double-edged sword kind of thing of like, it says a lot, but it doesn't say anything definitively because there's all things being said by characters who have their many flaws.
Yeah.
And so it's not like, I mean, yeah, it's very much a war is bad kind of thing, but it's not saying like war is bad and if bad people didn't do shit, then war wouldn't happen. It's very much like a war is kind of inevitable. Like there's elements of that, and there's elements of people making it worse, and there's elements of people getting caught in the crossfire and people instigate. Like it says so much, and you can kind of interpret how you want, which makes it like other great pieces of text, like open to interpretation and debate. But I think it's, again, because it has that fictional characters who say things, you can always palm off as like, well, yeah, this character says it, but it doesn't, just because a character says a negative thing, it doesn't mean, oh, like if a bad character says something racist, you're not gonna be like, oh, the writer's racist because he made a character say so. It's like, no, he's the bad guy. Like he's a bad guy who says bad things. Like, so you have that kind of,
you have that level of separation between what it's saying and what they're saying, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I feel like we're spinning our wheels a bit now, which is not something you want to hear. You want to hear from people making a podcast episode, but I think we've talked a lot about everything that's great about it.
Yeah.
I'm really looking forward to continuing it. Like, yeah, can't wait to see what happens next.
Yeah.
I look forward to I want to catch up to a point where it stops at a volume and then stop there. Because say, like, issue 70 just came out. If that's end of a volume, great.
It's pretty strict on 6-issue volumes, isn't it?
Yeah. So what I might
60
do is
will have been,
I'll probably
66 will have been.
Yeah, I'll probably read up to issue 60 and then just stop there and make a note of it somewhere and then get back into it. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to continuing it. And I'm hoping that if you're listening to this point in the episode and still haven't read Saga, I really hope that this has inspired you to just literally issue 1, I think will hook you. If you don't like issue 1, firstly, how dare you? But also, if you don't like issue 1, then don't bother, because it's that pretty much all the way through.
So, end of the episode.
Yep.
I want to very pointedly and specifically not do calls to action today. And not even in the way that we have not been doing calls to action recently.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Because I just want to take the time that we would usually spend doing calls to action, thanking you disparate band of weirdos who listen to this thing that we make.
All of you illiterates.
All of the illiterates. Because, to be honest with you, I just saw our Spotify Wrapped. There are more of you than I thought there were.
Exactly.
So thank you so much for listening through 100 episodes of Ryan and I trying to talk about comic books, but inevitably just talking shit.
Yeah, the Tangent Podcast is an I think like an also known as.
It's an alternate title, isn't
Yeah.
it? So just 100 fucking episodes of the Comic Lira podcast. I'm so chuffed with it. I'm so happy that we broke through that milestone, Ryan.
And in another 100, we'll do another Brian K. Vaughan title.
Oh, we're gonna have to do Ex Machina.
Nah, we can do Paper Girls next.
In fairness, that's 2 years away. So
Yeah, but we can do Paper Girls. Like that's Paper Girls. I think is my third favorite. No, my third favorite is Ex Machina. But I think Paper Girls is a better one to talk about.
I've not read Paper Girls or Tank Girl.
I don't know. Did he do Tank Girl?
I'm pretty sure he did. Yeah.
Okay. Well, yeah, or that, or Runaways. But that would be a Marvel thing. Like we could do that as well.
We could do Marvel and Brian K. Vaughan.
Yeah.
What a wonderful day that'll be.
And next week, if you're listening then, it will be our Cheers and Jeers for the year.
Cheers and cheers for the year.
Coming out a little later than last year, but that's because we had this 100th episode to do and stuff. So
because Saga's been releasing this year,
Yeah.
does it?
No,
Does
we
it
have
get
to
in?
we have to catch up to it. If we catch up to Saga, we can include it next. We can do 2025
2025, yeah.
Cheers and Jeers. But yeah, so next week Cheers and Jeers, and then the week after that, I'm hoping to have a best of edited,
Oh,
and
wow,
then that
cool.
might be the episode that comes out then.
I'm really excited for that because I want to
Yep.
listen to it.
And then January will be a bit of who's who weird kind of stuff because it's kind of a weird time where we could just do whatever we want because
Yeah.
we can't do stuff for the next Cheers and Jeers. So yeah, it's going to be a weird month in January, but
Yeah.
then we'll be back on track soon after that. So, but the thing that will not change is every Monday you will get an episode.
New episodes every Monday.
I swear on Jamie's unborn children that there will be an episode out every Monday. And you can believe that.
That's so low stakes for you. You edit and upload the episodes.
I swear on Jamie's beard that every Monday an episode will come out.
Thank you so much for listening through this 100 episodes and by proxy this year. Happy fucking New Year, kids. Have a great time.
Thank you. Goodbye.